The Front Row Back Row podcast is a show where two grad school buddies discuss physical therapy entrepreneurship. I helped guide a company to an 8-figure exit, and I'm now starting my own mobile company. Brian grew his mobile practice to 4 clinics, and he's now doing $1 million in revenue. Join us as we help you grow your own business. Hello and welcome to the Front Row Back Row podcast. My name is Dr. Owen Campbell. I am the owner of Simplify Motion Physical Therapy in Phoenix, Arizona. And my co-host, as always, is Dr. Brian Wolf, owner of Evolution PT and Fitness in Connecticut. And together we are PhysioGrowth. If you are ready to elevate your physical therapy practice, you need to join PhysioGrowth, where we mentor PTs to boost their income, build successful practices, and thrive in the business of healing. Visit school.com/physiogrowth-mentorship-group and start growing today. And Brian, today we're going to talk about a really big topic that everybody wants to know a little bit about, but it's really hard to find information on because it's such a small group. And I'm not bragging because both of us are in this group, but how to land a whale. And when I mean a whale, I mean a client or in your case, a soccer team that will give you a lot of business, a lot of notoriety, a lot of social evidence that, that's the guy who treats, for in your case, NYCFC, or that's the guy who treats this person's whatever, right? Celebrity, business person, whatever. Anybody who started a practice and is trying marketing, and even if you haven't started a practice, you kind of know in your town who's the guy who treats the local football team, who's the guy who treats the local basketball team. And I think this is going to be a great episode because we can talk about our experiences, and also it's not unachievable, but you have to have a good headspace about it, and it's a long game.
For sure.
Today that's going to be our topic that we talk about today.
Yeah, man. I think this is something that I feel like that, Owen, I know you probably get asked a lot, but people ask me this kind of stuff all the time. Like, how did you do this? How did you do that? And a lot of it is, I remember thinking when I was younger in my career, particularly, you talk about high schools, like how do they get the high school contract, right?
Yep.
And I got like 3 of them. So it's like, it's one of those things where it's like, it's not that big of a deal. And we can talk a little about pain points, and we've talked about these in some past podcasts. And first thing is, and first foremost, is understanding that these aren't difficult to do. You just got to learn the skills on how to do it, and then that just falls in into order and becomes an easy thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's all mindset. So I'll talk about mine. I'm a cash-based physical therapist in Phoenix, Arizona, and in Phoenix we get a lot of snowbirds, right? And you could go to a cafe in Scottsdale in like January and you will see famous people, right? Just like in New York City, there's people at certain times, LA, all this stuff, right? And it's a big vacation spot. And of course, people who tend to have fame and notoriety don't necessarily want to go to the clinic down the corner. So they will look up and they will try and find local PTs whenever they come to town. So one of my clients, he or she, I signed an NDA, so I don't want to give too much about, but essentially this client is someone who needs or wants physical therapy pretty consistently, has the money to pay for it, and is someone that they have the financial means to be able to make sure that they're if I need to go somewhere else in the country or in the world, they could fly me there, and they've done that, right? So this is definitely a client that once you kind of tell people, hey, I can't make that meeting because I'm out of town for this person, they kind of start asking like, man, how'd you get that, right? And for anybody who's doing a private pay, cash-based personal physical therapy practice, you probably know somebody in your town who has something like this. So it'll either be a Major League Baseball player, a friend of mine just has one of those on his roster, right? Different celebrities, different business people, anybody who gets that level. And it's kind of interesting the way I don't want to say it fell into my lap. I always kind of feel like it did, but then I realized like the backstory of it, right? And essentially what it was is I was working for somebody and they called her, right? And the problem there is did I do the marketing? No. but she's not the highest rate on, highest on Google. It's not like she's sitting here spending thousands and thousands of dollars. Anyway, I saw him, provided excellent care, and was able to get the business for myself the next multiple times that he came in. And also because the person who gave it before tried to double charge him because they found out, how much this person has. So a pro tip, do not charge based on how fancy the car is in the driveway. That was the number one way to take anybody who's very affluent and make them run away from you.
Totally.
So these are, that's my backstory. And I think that, or at least from my with my client. Right. And, I was kind of, what was some of the things we were talking about like, how do we get,
I think in that case, like a lot of it is like how, like, what you just said, we're gonna run some themes here, is like how it fell in your lap, right? Because I think that's something where, and I can tell the story from
well, and that's it. Okay, so the fell in my lap part, right? I think I should go into that a little bit more, right? It did fall into my lap in terms of the phone call. The initial phone call I got was not me marketing, was not me all that stuff, but my professionalism, my ability to show up. They wanted me at certain different hours of the day. They needed me to move and change different things. I worked every weekend for like 2 months straight because that's what they wanted. And what that became, and then also too, with someone at this level, there's usually a lot of people involved, right? So their security staff, or people are coordinating other things, their businesses, their financial interests, their PR people, all that stuff. So you have to be very willing to dance around all this stuff and realize, okay, on some level, I'm the help, right? I'm not, I had to swallow my pride a little bit and realize, okay, I'm a damn good therapist, but at the same time, like, there's much more important things going on in this guy's life, right? So I think it fell into my lap from a marketing standpoint, but I think I kept the business and nurtured the business and retained the business because I was willing to do a lot of that, like, kind of grind work, right? And build those relationships.
That's actually what I was going to say to you. And I'll tell you the quick story of the NYCFC thing, because we were doing the Premier Lacrosse League first, and one of the things that I would say that talking to Mike and my business partner Mike, and how he landed that in the short term, and one day we'll have to have him on and like talk about this process too, about this, because I think this would be great for him to talk about. But the one thing that he always said, and we both have agreed on, is if you take care of the client, or in this case the patient, or you take care of the athlete, good things will always happen, right? In terms of that process, right? And I think that's another thing that probably happened here. And I know Owen, so I know he's a good physical therapist, but I also know that he's also a good guy. So it probably also helped in terms of that nurturing process, like you were talking about, and willing to bend over backwards for that person. And I think when it came to New York City Football Club, we were already doing the Premier Lacrosse League. They were looking for a physical therapist, and they were like, we have two immediate needs. We need a full-time person, but we also need someone to come to that training camp for us. Well, I live in the Northeast, so March time to go down for 3 weeks in Florida, sure, I'm in. I'll do it. So literally, I was like, I'll go down to Florida for 3 weeks.
Was this like a LinkedIn ad that they put out, or like how did you get that initial phone
call? So we were doing this. So that's a great question. So when it comes to the Premier Lacrosse League, again, a lot of these things in pro sports are who you know, right? So I know people in the NFL now. I know people in MLB. I know people in MLS. I know people in the NBA. I know people all over the place now because just being in sports. If you're in there, once you crack into sports, it's very easy to stay in because you can network really, really well. And a lot of that is, I think the key word I just used there is networking, right? We were talking about this pre-show.
I'll give you so a lot of listeners might say, okay, well, great for you. You had a baseball player before, so that helps you, but I don't have a baseball player yet.
Yeah.
I know John Rahm's chiropractor, right? Mm-hmm. John Rahm, for people who don't know, one of the best golfers in the world, was world number one like last year, right? And I said, so how'd you get John, right? And he's like, dude, I was a friend of a chiropractor who was going to try and do Titleist Performance Institute. I hate golfers. And then I basically showed up and did some videos, and all of a sudden, like, the entire golf world trusts us. And that's how I got John Rahm. And then he also has a lot of players with the Yankees and the Mets, and he's in Phoenix, right? So I'm like, how'd you do that? And he's like, I treated the grandma of a like D1 prospect, and then I treated the kid out in Arizona, and then he became, I forget who it was, but you would know because you're a Yankees fan, but he became someone pretty regular rotation on the Yankees. And then he's like, then I would fly out to New York and all of them wanted me. So he's like, I have a huge baseball and a huge golf thing now, just simply because I said yes to like a buddy saying, "Hey, do you want to shoot a TV show or like a thing?" And then another buddy who basically was I treated his mom, right, or grandma. So, I think getting that first step is important. And I'm interested. Like, how'd you get your first one?
So the first one with Mike and some of the other ones, like someone just recommended me on something I did from baseball, and I got a professional athlete. But I think one of the basically
So
the
you
best way I would
marketed
describe it.
yourself with like baseball, right?
Yeah. So what essentially happened on that front was obviously we just got referred. I never really traced it all the way back. Was the bigger problem. But then
Yeah.
outside of that was one of the things that happened before that with the Premier Lacrosse League was Mike just literally cold called like Kyle Harrison, Paul Rabel, was like, hey, like love working with you
Oh,
guys, huge lacrosse player, would love to work with you guys. And he was in LA, and then they reached out and they actually worked with him. And then what's
yeah,
funny is that what ended up happening was then they started the Premier Lacrosse League, and who did they turn to figure out physical therapy but Mike, right? And so
yeah.
that's how we eventually, me and Mike joked that someday we'll write a business book that says we say just say yes. You said that like I just said yes, right? And
Yeah.
we joked that
Yeah.
it's just say yes, right? So we said yes and did stuff and like traveled around. And then what happened was once we started doing stuff with some of these guys, the networking starts to happen. And before we knew it, I was like, I'll go down to Florida with NYCFC. They, so and so called so and then what happens is then once you're in the 3 weeks that I was down there, I was working in that and doing a great job and taking care of these athletes. And the athletes and the coach wanted me to stick around. And so
Good.
before I knew it, I'm now 4 years into doing it. So, and now to make phone calls and connect, now what happens? Authority is created. And so by
Yeah.
that point, now you start to nurture relationships like, that client you were talking about. I'm sure then like you've created relationships with other people that are in other organizations that now you can talk to about different things. And so ultimately that's what ends up happening in all these different ways. And what's cool is then if someone's like, hey, I want to get in touch with, I always think about this with Gotham FC is a company we'd love to get involved with,
Mhm.
just because it's cool. It's another professional female soccer team. And
Oh, there you go.
so what ended up happening was we were like, how do we get in touch with that person? Well, if I reach out to NYCFC and I'm like, hey, do you know someone at Gotham that I can reach out to? They're like, yeah, sure, here. And it's the sporting director of Gotham FC, and it's their cell phone number. So
Oh,
like
there you go.
the reality is like, you talk about the Yankees. Like, imagine if you could just be like, "Hey, where's Brian Cashman's number?" Like, "Oh yeah, here's his cell phone number." Like
Mhm.
that's a big difference than like your point, a LinkedIn ad, a team works. And if you're young, like to give you an idea, when you network like this, I didn't have to compete for anybody for a job. The times that I've helped NYCFC hire two physical therapists, they've had over 170 applicants
Mhm.
for those two times. So when you're in that pool, it's that much more competitive. That's actually how this conversation started with Owen and I was someone reached out to me and asking me about this stuff. And one of the things that I would tell him was he was like, he lived in like upstate New York and was trying to figure out kind of how to crack into pro sports. And I was like, you got to be prepared to move, because like, unless you're going to work with one team that's local, you got to be prepared to move, because I can't work with a team in Minnesota unless I go there. So
Yeah.
like, you got to be willing to like go do the networking, go do the work.
And I think that's an interesting point, right? So there's two things that I took from your experience is that and I mean, I don't want to brag, but my experience too, you got to deliver, right?
Yeah.
You cannot be bad at doing physical therapy. But again, anybody listening to this podcast is probably pretty good at being a PT, right? They've started a business, they're making money just by doing that, right? And I think the other thing is when we talk about sports, because a lot of people who listen to this are also like, I like that baseball player, I like that. You have to understand that it's either going to be you have to be very available, right? Like I'll move to Iowa so I can start with these guys who need somebody, right? And then you work your way up, or you do what you said your partner Mike did, where you say, "I'm just going to cold call like these four people," and then, I mean, they were receptive, but I'm sure he probably had to be pretty annoying to get them to come into his building for the first time. So if you are local and say like for me, you got family, kids, I'm not flying to Atlanta just because somebody gave me a tip, right? But say if I want, the Cardinals or if I want, something where they need some help, I'm going to be annoying as all hell. I'm going to be willing to work on weekends. My wife's going to know that when they call, I leave. And eventually knowing long term, and I think that's the big key with this is you have to think long term, that long term, eventually I'm going to be able to say, well, I'm the Cardinals PT. And oh, by the way, they come to me during the week, right? And I don't have to drive that far. So it's important to realize that it's not just a phone call. and it's almost always based on you got to be good and you also got to hustle.
Yeah, I think the three things that kind of came that are very similar in a lot of ways is one, it kind of falls in your lap a little bit, right? So you
Mhm.
got to see the opportunity when it's there. I think
You
that's
got to
the
be
thing that I'm
smart enough
hearing.
to know that that's an
Yes,
opportunity.
like, oh, it's this is what is this? What is this just fell into my lap that I can do,
Yeah.
right?
Two of those other PTs that she had, they were like, "Oh, I can't do it that day."
Yeah,
Immediately when she told me someone wants to do this, I'm like, "I'm dropping everything. Let's go."
exactly, exactly. So
Right.
to your point, that's it, right? So the second part on that, like it falls in your lap. The second one has been willing to say yes and bend over backwards to do it, right? Like I
Mhm.
said, I remember and like we're very lucky to be married to very supportive people. I remember
Mhm.
telling my wife, I was like, I think I got to go to Florida for 3 weeks to do this thing, and she goes, you have to go, and I was like, yep. Cool,
Yep.
I'm going. So
Yep.
it was not really. I wasn't like I was sort of asking permission, but not really. But she understood like you got to go, right? And I would tell the
Yeah.
same thing. So it's like the concept of like you gotta go, right? So
Yep.
just say yes in that capacity. And then the
Mhm.
third is do a really good fucking job, right? Like I think that's it. Like and for you guys out there, like you gotta be
Get
good
results.
because I can tell you I have worked with a lot of ATs and PTs that like even the ones I can think of several guys that did great jobs that still like got fired or lost their jobs or
Uh-huh.
whatever. And then I know I can think of one PT that did a terrible job that then she eventually got fired too. And like it's just a matter of when you see that like the opportunity, if it presents itself, you got to be
Mhm.
prepared. You got to have those things aligned. So sometimes it's also for some people being patient. You know what I mean? I mean, Owen and I have 15 plus years experience, 30 years experience combined. Like if you're a year or two out of school, like put in your work. Like
Yeah.
you got to stack an undeniable amount of abilities as a
Yeah.
therapist. Then be like, I can do it at this level. We know
Well,
what we'll do. Oh, and
you gotta feel you
we'll
gotta
have to
feel
have my buddy
confident
Jez on.
telling.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So I'll have
Yeah,
somebody
you
on from NYCFC at some point. We've talked about this, and we'll tease it a little bit now,
there you go.
because he'll come because he'll come on. He's already said he would. So that'll be great because he worked for the Anaheim Ducks. You love it. He's a hockey guy. He came in
Yo.
for the Anaheim Ducks, and he worked for the Brooklyn Nets for a while, and then also worked over the Maple Leafs. And we'll be all about talking about the stuff. So he's a good guy to talk with too.
And we're talking about transformative deals, right? Like these people and getting, if you get one of these, your whole business is different. And if you want to transform your physical therapy career, you can do it with Physio Growth. We mentor PTs to unlock higher income, build thriving practices, and master the business of care. Start your journey. I can't read. Start your
Nice.
journey at school.com/physiogrowth mentorship group or whatever. Yeah, just
I'm
read it in the show notes. Oh,
I'm really
I
sometimes when Owen has these train wreck reads, what's hilarious is I'm always like, how did you do better than me in school and some stuff? Like I don't even know how that happened. How did that happen? Oh my god. Oh my god. But to your point about physio
brute
growth, that's
memorization.
true.
That's how I
God,
did
if
it.
you're somebody listening to this podcast who's like, hey, I want to get into pro sports, like we have people in pro sports in our group. So like
Yeah.
again, there are people who are involved that are working in the NHL, that are doing like in the MLS, that have been connected to these places. So like again, like it's also a networking aspect. So it's kind of
Yeah.
cool the people that we've talked with and our networks, and that's something that we're going to do a better job of bringing on to our podcast too. But yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of kind of the taking it home a little bit, I think a key that I see with a lot of people, and I'll give you a story, is that and I'll tell this story because it's not somebody who works for us. And I
Mhm.
actually NYCFC was looking for a massage therapist, and it didn't really work out for my wife because the pay wasn't good enough. But in terms of where we were, I was trying to connect to another massage therapist to this group, and I was like, hey, it's in New York. And I'll never forget, she was like, oh, but I'm not like licensed in New York, so I don't know if I can go and do it there. And like, what would be
Mhm.
your first reaction on? I was like, go get your freaking license in New York.
Yeah.
Like, what are you
Yeah. Like
talking
figure it
about?
out. Yeah.
Exactly, right? But then she squandered that. Like this is the thing that has a compounding effect on that. There's that opportunity that I'm handing on her plate, being like, hey, you go do this there. I can recommend you, and you can basically get that job. At
Yeah.
least a part-time PRN job. It's perfect for you. You're kind of self-employed. You could do this. And
Yeah.
she was like, nah, no thanks. And the thing was, to give people an idea, not only is that like she squandered that idea of working in professional sports,
Hmm.
but it also left a weird taste in my mouth where I was like,
Yeah.
all right, this is somebody that doesn't want to do big stuff. Right. So in my
Yeah.
mind, I was like, if you don't want to do big things, I'm not going to do that. So a lot of it is mindset. A lot of it is mindset of like, you got to be prepared to be like, hey, this is, one thing that I think going that happens all the time, that I think probably happens to your business is, well, if I land this client, will I have enough time to do it? figure it
Yeah.
out. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? Like the answer is work 1,000 hours if you got it. Like
Yeah.
do the work. Like put the time in. Like I was at Gary Vaynerchuk with that stuff. It's like this stuff can be hard. You got to put in the work. But if you want to follow your dreams and do some big shit, you got to go work your ass off. So I think
Well,
that's a big piece on the effort side.
and I think it's interesting too to, you look at what you're saying. There's a few things to pick apart with that, right? Like you said, well, my wife didn't take it because the money wasn't great, right? But so she's like, well, okay, the money might not be great, and I don't want to get my license and blah blah blah, right? But I don't think she was seeing the long term of, and then I can put on my marketing that I am trusted by people who get paid millions of dollars to do a sport, right? So I think that, understanding that you're going to take a short term loss, like inconvenient, maybe a little bit less money because, they know they could say anybody, they could pick anybody they want, like you said, 170 resumes, right?
Yeah.
And then understanding that, like, yeah, I'm gonna have to work for this because they know and I know in the long run how well this could pay off for me, right? When you can be that PT in your city or that massage therapist in your city that says, I work with a soccer club, I work with a local football, local basketball, whatever. Everyone knows when they're hiring for that that's why you're there, right?
Yeah.
That's why you answered the LinkedIn post, right? And I think the other big thing is realize that when we say don't suck, we don't mean like you have to identify perfectly the interval at the shoulder when this person's at X degrees of whatever.
Well, that's a
No,
great point
it
you're making.
means be very personable, be
Yeah.
easy to talk to, show up when you say you're going to, all the stuff that's free. That is what they care about. Yes, they want you to fix it, but they don't care. This guy, the guy who I typically deal with for my client, he will constantly say to me how they fire PTs, and he's like, "This is the guy you want, to like fix your shoulder," and then the client just says, "Yeah, but I don't like him, so bye."
Yeah.
Right, and that's it. So yes, don't. You have to be some level of good, right? You
Yeah.
have to get results, but
You
my
put it,
God, like
you
people
just
don't understand that.
I explain that, here's a great analogy that I would say, because you just brought it up with your client, but I would say another one when it comes to like professional sports is a big one, right?
Mhm.
Like if you're hiring somebody, a big piece of it, realize that these guys work 24/7. They're on the road together. They're each other's friends. So the reality is like, if I can't have a beer with you and I don't think I want to hang out with you on the sides, I kind of don't want to work with you. And the reality is like a lot of it is that we've joked about that in the past. Like I want to, if I like, would I have beers with this person? Yeah, this person's pretty cool. All right, awesome. Like you've already got a leg up. Like that's a great delineation. Is like when you do a great freaking job, a lot of it is also making sure that like you like the person likes you. There's an easy rapport. It's simple.
Mhm.
You're relaxed. It's not like there's not a lot of effort to create the relationship. You got to be that type of person, and you also got to be able to know what you're doing, right? Like you
Yeah,
got to be able to like be a good physical therapist. So like to your point, there's a good technicality aspect to it, but it's also got to be that you understand people and that you just
yeah,
we're what it is we're in the service business. And until people realize, well, I didn't get in this to be in the service business, I got fucking tough shit for you. Like you're in it, right?
yeah,
Right. Just because you don't want to work at McDonald's doesn't mean you're not in customer service, right? Like it's
yeah,
like
right,
the difference being is you're a customer service facing thing.
yeah,
And by the way, if you're a physical therapist who's like, well, I don't want to deal with customers, then you should probably think about going to get your PhD or going into teaching or something else,
yeah.
because you got to work with people in this industry. You've got in the wrong business. So
Well, and I think that's just super important because you think about it from like a treatment side, you got to relate to your patient, right?
yeah,
It just so happens that these guys are like bazillionaires or they're professional
yeah,
athletes or whatever. If you can't relate to them, you can't get the work done,
yeah.
right? You can't get them better. So,
It's an
I
easy
mean, we
one. I mean,
we we talk, we talk about it with grandma down the street. Why can't it be with these people too?
especially if you got kids. Like my players that I like working with the most, the guys I shouldn't say like working with the most. I like working with all my guys, but like the ones who have kids, it's such an easy one because like there's guys that we have kids and they're the same age, and we're
Oh
joking
yeah,
about the kids and blah blah. And like I always think, particularly new athletes, when I'm like, oh, I don't really know them, let me build rapport and talk with them. And like I always like when like, oh, this is great, man. I really like when you do this. This was fantastic. Like it's just building that rapport. It's an extra touching point. Like if you're a
yeah.
good physical therapist, and I know of good, we'll have to have, like I said, love to have Jez on here because he told me a story once about how he had a great physical therapist who was amazing, but ended up getting fired just because he didn't get along with the ATs. And a lot of it is like that. Like if you don't get along with the other people, like you're going to get out of there because they don't want to be around you. So
Yeah,
it's like it's good to be in that aspect. You know what I mean? So that's important.
yeah,
So
definitely.
Cool, man. But again, if you want to take your PT practice to the next level at PhysioGrowth, we guide physical therapists to financial success and practice growth. Visit school.com/physiogrowth-mentorship-group and grow your future today. There you go. I stumbled a little bit for you there.
Just one word though. Just one word.
Exactly.
You didn't like crash into the side of a building like I did, but
You're good. You're good. Exactly. You made me look good, Owen. It's nice.
Oh,
It's
fun
good.
fact, by the way, I learned from working corporate where they had like almost 1,000, locations. Once a month, somebody crashes into a PT clinic. Yeah.
Ooh, I did not know that.
Literally, and that's only of that one company, right? I think it's
Yikes.
people on opioids, their hips broken, so they can't find the gas pedal, something like that. But I talked to a guy high up, and he's like, "Dude, you would be shocked at how many times this happens." So
Actually, I will tell you the amount again, like the amount of people that drive into buildings in general is a bit alarming. I won't lie to you. I
was going to say you would think it wouldn't be, but it is.
It should be zero. It should be zero. It's a lot more than zero.
Definitely a zero statistic. Yeah,
exactly.
All right, and with that, Brian, we are out, my friend. Have a good week.
See you, buddy.
See you.